biggest takeaway of what went wrong and how to fix it?
You know, in each of those drives, it was literally like one play that we got to make, and you know, we've had that at different times this year against the Titans. We had just a couple chances to be able to get a play to stop a drive. We weren't able to make it. We had a 4th and 10. Have to make that. You know, there have been different times over the course of our years here that's happened. But we've always sort of picked them up and made a play somewhere else along. Special teams made a play, offense made a play, and in this, you know, we didn't get that done. So that's sort of where it was. There was really nothing that continually came up.
Is there a pattern? There's nothing like a pattern or similarity where you can say, okay, this is where we're not making the plays.
You know, I think probably one of our biggest things. I mean, you know, I'm not a big stats guy. Like, really, the only thing I really care about is points allowed. I mean, I'm well documented for that. But another way that we can affect the game is takeaways, and we haven't been taking the ball away. And you know, I think there's a fine line there, and you always warn the players. Sometimes chasing takeaways, chasing turnovers puts you in worse position. You start giving up plays. Guys press too much. They go for the strip instead of the tackle, and you give up a bigger play, or they go for the interception instead of the PBU, and you give up a big play or stuff like that. So you got to temper that. But I think it is. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest thing. There's two things we can do as a defense. One is hold the score down, and number two is put our offense in position to score or score ourselves. And that's a thing that was a common theme for us last year, that we haven't really been able to get our feet under us this year in creating those game-changing plays. Any of those games, like before we gave up the 4th and 10 play, I mean, we were, you know, a couple inches away from getting an interception. You know, when Cam throws the ball, he's getting hit, and you know that's you know, it's that close to stripping the ball. This is a game of inches. It doesn't change the win or the loss, but that's just what you have to do. We need to find a way to come up with those plays without pressing, without playing out of our character.
Jim, what was the decision to have Dexter be the slot?
Well, you know, Dex was with us last year and was our backup nickel. And with Sid being week to week, we thought it was best just to plug and play one guy in there rather than layering the you know, and moving a lot of different guys in there. So that was probably the biggest thing. Dex did a good job in coverage. I'd like to see his tackling a little bit cleaner. I think it's probably a little bit to be accepted as a little bit of the cost of doing business when you get a guy that hasn't played in the last month. A little bit like those first preseason games, you know, you're always worried the most about tackling. I think that's what we saw with Dex, but he went in, executed coverage as well, got his guy covered. Just like to see him be able to make a couple of those tackles, some of those tackles. And I think I don't want to just single Dex out there. You know, defensively as a whole, on those drives, we got a lot of yards after catch and some runs that went against us. We got to do a better job with that.
Like in the Tennessee game, it was almost like a switch flipped. I mean, you had them so perfectly defense for so long, and then all of a sudden everything they did worked, it seemed like. How have you been through that before, and what do you make of that?
Well, you can just dial it back last year around this time. We played the Giants, and it was the same thing. We shut them out through 3 quarters. They scored 24 in the 4th quarter, not 21, 24. I mean, there's some of that is, I mean, you know, there's always things you can do better. There's always calls you can play better. There are calls you can call better. There's things the defense players can do a little bit better. Sometimes you need to tip your cap to an opponent. I mean, I think there's some humility that's involved in that. I have a lot of respect for what Cam did in that game. He was having probably the worst day of his career, and that's tough duty. I've seen that a lot of times when you can't get anything going and it sort of rolls up and you finish the game that way. But as a competitor and as an opponent, I have a lot of respect for what he was able to do in that game. And sometimes you do need to tip your cap to an opponent. It doesn't change we need to play better. But, you know, there's good players in the NFL. We saw that with Odell Beckham last year in that 4th quarter. He sort of took that game over, and, you know, no matter what coverage we called, we couldn't really get him covered. So, again, it's really the NFL as much as what we do sometimes.
Did the coverage change in the fourth quarter with more off coverage?
No, not really. I mean, I think probably the biggest change is blitz more in the fourth quarter than the first three quarters combined. You know, just in an effort to try to find some ways. And we were up 21 points, started the series off with a blitz. You know, they were going back, and we had a couple successful plays on blitz. We also gave up a touchdown on blitz, the one that was down tight in the red zone. You know, you single guys up, you get some of that. Our mix stayed pretty much the same other than that the whole game. They just made a couple plays that we didn't, and it's not unusual to see the ability to flick a switch that way. And I go back, we've had games where we started poorly. I think back to Giants last year at New York, and then we were able to get it settled down. You know, just the way it is.
Last year, Fletch played about 59% of your snaps. This year, he's playing, I think, about 83%. A, is that a concern? And B, if it is, how do you mitigate that, if at all?
Well, he's worked really hard to put himself in position to play more. So I think that you know, number one, he's worked really hard to do that. Number two, our defensive tackle situation is significantly different than it was last year. I mean, last year, Timmy Jernigan was playing healthy, and Bo was in there and playing healthy, and you know, Destiny was out there. Well, no, Destiny had the broken wrist or whatever he had last year. So, but we had a four-man rotation. This week it was Fletch and two guys at different points of the year were on the practice squad. So, you know, he sort of needed to be out there a little bit more. He really wasn't taxed. The way that game was going until the fourth quarter, he really wasn't taxed. We didn't play very many snaps. We were getting stops. You know, the offense controlled the ball for most of the third quarter. We got a quick stop. They controlled the clock the rest of the way. So I don't think it really affected him as much. Ideally, you'd like to have a better rotation, but that's just not where we are right now.
Jim, you said you felt you blitzed too much. Lee, besides the goal line one, which were the other ones that you felt?
No, I didn't say I thought it blitzed too much. I just said we blitzed more in the fourth quarter than in the first three quarters combined.
Blitz
It
is
had
always a
nothing to do.
double-edged sword, I mean, obviously, but is it more so with a guy like Cam because his escapability?
Well, that cost us on one play. You know, when you unless you bring 6 or even 7, which is a very high-risk situation because you're zero coverage in the back end. Unless you bring 6, it's hard. It's hard to cover all the gaps. You got 6 gaps. You got to cover A, B, and C gap. And if you bring 5, there's going to be an open gap, and the quarterback has the ability to scramble. The first drive of the third quarter, he was able to scramble against the pressure. Later in the game, we were rushing 4 and sort of spying him, and it kept the scrambles out, but he was making the plays with his arm, and you know, again, tip of the hat to him for that.
Against the Giants, you know, when Sidney went out, you brought in Rasul at safety and Avante at nickel and everything, and I was actually kind of curious, like, Rasul didn't play at all against, you know, on Sunday, and I was just kind of wondering what your reasoning for that was.
Well, he's really not a safety. He was the safety in that game because that was our emergency situation, and you know, that's the way we stacked it. That wasn't ideal either. I mean, it's really, you know, in game you'd rather just plug one player into a position and keep everybody else the same, but we didn't have any other nickels. So Vontae needed to go down there, and Rasul went in at safety. I mean, again, it wasn't ideal. With a little bit of time, we thought it was best just to plug and play Tex, who had been with us in the past, and you know, I played a little bit of football for us.
So then, like, do you see Rasul then as being pretty much an outside guy?
Yeah, he's an outside corner. I mean, his skill set, I think, best fits as an outside corner. He can do some other things for us, but if you're looking at trying to put him in the best position, I think it's always been outside corner for
Is there
him.
any consideration to putting, keeping Jalen outside and moving him inside on nickel and putting Rasul? Because that would also keep.
Yeah, and again, if maybe, and I don't want to pigeonhole myself or back myself in the corner on any of those things, but I think Sidney Jones changes him being week to week, and us. If we were thinking that, you know, Sid was out for the year or something like that, maybe that would be in the mix because Jalen has done that before. I think that Jalen plays better outside than he does inside, but he can play inside. I liked where we were with, with Sid in there and Darby and Jalen outside, with Rasul being the next man up. We just got to, it's just not, we're just not there right now with injuries, particularly with losing Avante or losing Rodney and then Avante moving to safety.
What's your assessment of your defenders defending their technique against rub routes this year? I know you guys worked on it a lot.
Yeah, this game there were a couple incidents of it happening. Everybody, we're going to see a bunch of it this week. We're going to see a bunch of double shallow crossers and things. It's built into everybody's offense now. When you're in man-to-man, you need to be especially aware of it. We weren't on a big 3rd down and 2, sort of, got run into. And, those guys can, there's a lot of different ways that they can rub. They can create what Frank Reich used to call legal traffic, like get in your way, run right at you, and at the last second step out of the way. And there's human nature that you're going to chop your feet, or you're going to try to get out of the way, and it just alters your course enough for people to get receptions. I think over the course of the year, we've been pretty good at minimizing those kind of plays. This game, there were a couple that hurt us.
Jim, what did you make of the space the corners were giving their wide receivers in the 4th quarter?
I don't think it was any different than the whole game.
Jim, what did you learn from Doug? What did you learn about Doug Marrone and Nathaniel Hackett working with him in Buffalo?
Yeah, Hack was going through a different thing. When I was in Buffalo in training camp, we were trying to rival the Eagles with pace of play. Everything was fast break, no huddle. It looked very similar to what was going on here in Philadelphia. And then we traded for Kyle Orton, or signed Kyle Orton, and all that was out the window. We were running a lot of zone read stuff. We had E.J. Manuel, Thad Lewis. You guys had him, yeah. So that script flipped a little bit. We were playing like really good defense, and we sort of played to that over the year. So I think that was probably, I don't know if that was exactly what Hack wanted to do. It was just what we had to do as a team to try to win games. I got a lot of respect for Doug Marrone. He's a football guy through and through. He's a Bill Parcells disciple. He's a tough-minded guy. He took a lot of flack. I think it was last year. Somebody asked him, maybe it was this year. I get confused. Somebody asked him what his ideal run-to-pass ratio was, and he said 100%. And that tells you all you need to know. He was an offensive lineman. Played a little bit in the NFL, played major college football, and there's a toughness and an attitude to that. I think that's where they would like their team to be. That's what carried them to the AFC Championship game last year. They got a couple tackles hurt. They've got their tight ends hurt. They lost their running back. It changes your run game a little bit, and I think they're still trying to find that. But it'll be nice to see those guys. But for 60 minutes of the game, relationships and anything else don't matter. But I certainly enjoyed my time with those guys.
Hey Jim, have you noticed that
you had mentioned your former practice squad defensive tackles, Jim? How did they play, and how much of a challenge is it with trying to rotate inside there without Jernigan?
Well, it's what you have. I don't want to say it's like drawing cards, but you play poker. You get the cards that you get, and you can't turn all 5 of them in. You gotta play your hand. And I thought those guys did a good job in the game. Bruce got back and got his playing time back, but they were around the quarterback. I thought they did a good job staying active in the pocket. Some of our pressures, those guys were right around, either keeping the guy from stepping up or making him counter step, and I thought they both handled themselves really well.
Hey Jim, have you noticed that offenses around the league are starting to become more aggressive on 4th down, 2-point conversions? Is that something that you were anticipating, given kind of the way that Philly set the standard last year, and something that you're emphasizing at all?
Yeah, I think that there's been a general trend to that in a while. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. I think that the legal offensive pass interference. When I say legal, I mean within a yard of the line of scrimmage. Sometimes it's hard to stop a 1-yard play in pass coverage because they can legally block you. There's no getting away with anything when it comes to that. Sometimes it's hard. I mean, we're seeing ICT and or illegal contact and defensive holding. Those calls are going up. I think that further emboldens offenses. I mean, that might be, sort of what takes them a little bit. I think people have confidence. People all across the thing look at analytics. I know this a couple weeks ago when we went for 2 down, when we just scored, we were down 14, and we went for 2. Like, I was a bit slack-jawed. I was like, what? What are we doing? I mean, I wasn't kin to, or I wasn't privy to those discussions and things like that with the analytics. And like being sort of old school was like, what? No. Kick the field goal. And then after the game, somebody was explaining to me like the statistics behind it, and it's like, oh, I get it, and then we saw it last night. I didn't see much of that game last night, but when I got home, I turned it on, and that was the time, and they were going for 2, and everybody was probably a lot like I was, like, what are they doing? But then when they explained it afterwards, and you give people time, and they talk to all the analytics people, looking like maybe that's a little better thing. It wasn't long ago that teams didn't have the resources that we have now. They didn't have teams of analytic guys. A lot of the information wasn't even available. And some of the research you were doing, you couldn't do some of the things that you did now, and that's been a big change. Maybe probably the last 8 or 9 years in the NFL, but it's grown from just a few teams doing stuff like that to everybody. So I think that's a little bit more what you're saying. Teams have more confidence in their offense. Scoring is up, completions are up. I remember being a kid, a quarterback was considered like a good quarterback if he was completing 50% of his passes. And then the standard became like 60. And now, like, if you're not completing 70, there's like something wrong. I mean, it's crazy. And Johnny Unitas era, guys were throwing more interceptions than they were touchdowns. And then it became like, hey, equal ratio, you're good. And then it was 2-to-1. And now these guys are 8-to-1 and 10-to-1. They're not turning the ball over. So that's a way too long answer for that question. But see y'all in London.
How y'all doing?
Nelson Aguilar's been your guys' kind of yak guy, was last year. It seems like a lot of the passes that are designed to go to him short haven't produced the end results that you'd want. What have been the issues there?
You mean the short passes not becoming long runs? Is that what you're
I
asking?
mean, there's been a lot of passes to him, short of the line of scrimmage or, just beyond it, and he hasn't been picking up yards. It seems like teams are keying in on it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those situations that you're talking about, there's tight coverage there, so it's a completion and a quick tackle. Could he break a tackle? I mean, I guess without examining each one here in this conversation. But a lot of times it's tight coverage and it's a tight window throw, and he's been making the catches and then he's been tackled. But again, he's a guy that we know is a playmaker for us, and we love his talent and his ability and what he brings to this offense, and we've got to continue to try to find ways to get him the ball down the field.
I mean, the thing that's been missing from him, I mean, he doesn't have those mid-range. He's got like 2 50-yarders, and almost everything else has been 6 to 8 yards. I mean, is there a focus on getting him the ball farther down the field? I mean, is that something you feel like you need to do?
Absolutely. I mean, he's somebody that we think about each and every week when we game plan. We have plays for him in those areas.
Mike Groh has 6 fumbles so far this year and 1 in every game so far. Are you doing anything with him to correct that issue, and do you see it?
Well, we emphasize it and we talk to him about it, and obviously pocket security is really important, and he understands that. So, we're obviously not tackling in practice, so it's one of those things that you just have to continue to emphasize until you get the results that you want.
On that last series after the game, Carson said maybe he forced the ball to Alshon on the 3rd down. Just the last 2 plays, kind of what did you see on film there?
Yeah, I think on the 3rd down, Carson said something like he wished he could have that one back. And I mean, there's plays every week that we all look at and examine. If we're being honest with ourselves and say, I'd really like to have this play back or that call back or whatever the case may be. And, he has a lot of confidence in Alshon. He thought he saw something, he can make a play, and you got to give Carolina credit. They did a good job of breaking that up.
Mike, Doug and the quarterbacks have always said this offense works best when you're spreading the ball around. Over the last 4 games, Alshon and Zach have been thrown to on more than 50% of Carson's attempts. I mean, is that less than ideal? I know they're productive, but
yeah. I mean, you raised 2 really good points. We got 2 guys that have been playing at a very high level, and they've been very productive. And we've been getting the ball. Carson's got a lot of trust in those guys, and they've been getting themselves open. I think we did a good job of spreading the ball around. Dallas had some good catches down the field the other day. But we need to continue to do that and keep everybody involved. I do think that helps every offense stay balanced and keeps the defense honest.
Would you like to see the backs involved
in the passing game more? Is that something you focus on?
Well, we've always utilized our backs in the passing game, and we know that those guys can take short throws and turn them into long runs. Had a couple good screens out of those guys the other day. In the drop back passing game, probably not as involved as they are some weeks. It's kind of a week-to-week thing. The ball finds them, and they make some plays, and sometimes some weeks the ball doesn't find them. But we have a lot of confidence in their ability to catch the ball.
If you look around the league at the amount teams are scoring, I think 4 teams average over 30 points. Your points are down pretty significantly from last year. What's going on there in terms of getting the ball in the end zone?
I think there's a lot of factors involved in it. Unfortunately, it's not an easy answer, and therefore it's not an easy fix. So we're focusing on a lot of different areas. In some cases, we had a couple opportunities. We end up 1st and goal, but it's 1st and 25 after a penalty, and we end up in a 15-play drive and getting no points. And so we kind of miss a turn there, if you will. And then have another, big screen, 50-yard player or thereabouts, and we're in field goal range, and that gets called back. So we feel like we're hurting ourselves in a lot of those cases, falling behind the chains and making it more difficult on ourselves than we need to. And 2 weeks ago, we did a good job of not doing that, and some of those same problems crept up again the other day, which hurt us.
Before that, what was the thinking before the penalty on the 50-yard in terms of when you got the ball? It was like a little over 2 minutes, and you were backed up, and you ran 3 times.
Are you saying in the 4-minute deal before the series before the last series?
No, at the end of the first half.
Oh.
You guys got the ball backed up.
The end of the half.
And you called 3 runs.
I think once we got backed up and got behind the chains, I mean, you'd have to ask Coach specifically. on that. But just generally speaking, you know, we had a little bit of time left on the clock and a long way to go, and wanted to, I guess, make sure that we took care of the ball.
Carson is clearly not a check down guy, his first inclination, and that serves you very well a lot of times. Are you working with him as a young quarterback when sometimes the smarter play is sort of, you know, take what's given as opposed to making something happen?
Absolutely.
And the second part of that question is that, do you think that's his nature and is going to be his nature for 10 years, or is it partly of being a young guy?
Well, I think he's an aggressive-minded quarterback, and he, you know, he looks to push the ball down the field, which, like you stated, is a strength. And then we also try to emphasize the times where it's good to put the ball in play, and let the, you know, the system and the players around you work for you. So I think there's a balance there, and certainly don't want to you know, take away one of his strengths, which we know has been a really successful formula for us.
How about the third two in particular? Like, what's the teaching point there? I mean, do you say, you know, look, you have a back in the left flat there, or you know, hey, make that a better throw? Or I mean, what do you tell him about that?
Yeah, I think it's right along those lines. I mean, he knows that you know, he admitted, he said he'd like to have it back. So you know, we've got a guy there that I think that if he could do it over again, he'd throw it to Wendell.
As a follow-up to that question,
Teach him.
I'm sorry.
How difficult is it to teach him that? Because it is something that's kind of going against his nature and what he does normally. Is it something that just takes a long time?
I don't know how long it takes. I couldn't put a time frame on it, but Carson's a smart guy. He knows, you know, where the ball should go, and he's a disciplined player. So, you know, it's an experience that we can all learn from.
As a follow-up to the scoring question, you're at 22 points per game. You're usually between kind of 17 and 23. What's your target going into the game? Is there a number you think you need to hit to put yourself in a good chance of winning?
Well, I'd like you threw a 30. I mean, we'd like to be in that 30 range is where we'd like to be. But we know that if we get 25, then, you know, we got a really good chance to win. So we're continuing to work on that. We know it's an area that we need to improve on. Nobody's satisfied with the production and the results that we've gotten by any means. And trust me, we're working hard to try to get it fixed.
You guys are picking up yards, and Carson was throwing at an amazingly high rate, but yet the points weren't there. We had the missed field goal, and the 17-yard drive is great, but is there not enough of the quick strike that we saw last year? Is that one of the things that may be lacking?
Yeah, I mean, we did get some of those, you know, quick strike touchdowns last year that we haven't gotten this year. So, I mean, those when you it's hard to drive, you know, 5 times in a game 80 yards. So you need those plays to get the points up, and that's one of the things that, you know, we're trying to clue in on and put those guys in those situations. And we had some balls down the field, and you know, in that backed up situation, we hit a good ball to Alshon going down the left, and another one down to Ertz, and you know, we flipped the field in a hurry. So trust me, we're having those conversations, and you know, we want those plays back in the offense.
Last year, the running back situation, you know, Wendell has obviously gotten more of the playing time as opposed to Corey Clement the last couple of games. Is there something Wendell is doing that maybe Corey isn't, or is it just kind of how the game plays out, and how do you see that?
No, I think, you know, Deuce manages those guys, and they all have a role in each and every game. I mean, Corey was just working himself back in from an injury, and Wendell's done a really good job for us. We got a lot of trust and confidence in both those guys that when called upon, they're going to be productive.
Last year, you were the best team in the league at running the ball out of 11 personnel. I think you're last this year. What do you see as the biggest differences there?
Well, we know that we've got a really good offensive line, and we didn't get the production that we wanted the other day, or that we thought we might get in the running game, and we came in enthusiastic and energetic to get back on this week's game plan to talk about the things that we think that we need to correct, so those mistakes don't occur again, and put another good plan together for Jacksonville. So, you know, we haven't lost any confidence in our ability to run the ball, and we know it's important to try to be balanced and be able to run the ball well in 11.
Teams aren't really targeting Boye or attacking Boye and Ramsey all that often, but they are attacking the middle of the field. How important is it to rotate your weapons as far as the tight ends and wide receivers and use different personnel matchups against this team?
Well, I think we talked about it here earlier in this session that we like to spread the ball around, and we got be able to do that against his defense. You know, their reputation precedes them. They've got excellent secondary. They're strong up front, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. We got to be able to get the ball out of our hand and spread the ball around and find favorable matchups. And again, we have good players in that huddle, and we're confident about their ability to show up on Sunday and make plays.
They have unusual speed of linebacker. How much does that create an issue when you're trying to get tight ends open and use the running game outside?
Yeah, they got a lot of team speed in general. A lot of team speed. That's one of the reasons why they played in the AFC Championship game last year. They got an excellent defense, so it's a challenge.
Thanks, Coach.
Yep. Thank you.